My mom called me a burden and kicked me out of the house. The only problem? I'm the one who actually owns the house, and she just found out the hard way. You're a burden. Just pack your things and leave. Those were the last words my mother ever spoke to me in person. They didn't come with a scream or a dramatic flourish. They were delivered with this cold, clinical detachment that makes your blood turn to ice. I didn't argue. I didn't beg for an explanation. I didn't even shed a single tear. I just turned around, grabbed my keys and my laptop bag, and walked out of that front door. I didn't even bother closing it behind me. I left 26 years of my life behind like it was a cheap motel room I'd forgotten to check out of, leaving the mess for someone else to clean up. It wasn't until a month later that the reality of my exit actually hit home. I was sitting in my new studio apartment, the silence finally feeling like peace instead of a held breath, when my phone lit up. It was a text from my brother Derek, the last person I expected to hear from. The vibration felt like a physical sting. "Why didn't you cover the mortgage this month?" He snapped via iMessage. No hello, no how are you? Just pure, unadulterated entitlement. I stared at the screen for a long time, watching the little typing bubbles dance and then vanish. I finally typed back one single, devastating line. "Oh, I thought you didn't need me." That's when the calls started. That's when my inbox became a war zone. That's when everything finally exploded. But to understand why I let a house I legally owned go into default just to spite my own flesh and blood, I have to back up. My name is Evan. I'm 26. And up until a few weeks ago, I lived with my mother and my older brother in a house that, and this is the kicker, I technically owned. Yeah, you read that right. My name was on the deed, my credit was on the line, and yet I was the one being told I was a burden. I grew up in a small town outside of Minneapolis. It wasn't one of those charming Main Street USA towns you see in Hallmark movies. It was the kind of place where the neighbors spent their Sundays gossiping about which trailer had the most active meth lab, and the congregation at church knew your family's deepest, darkest secrets before you even sat down in the pew. My mother, Teresa, was the queen of appearances. To the world, she was a saint. Hair perfectly curled, lipstick applied with surgical precision, clothes pressed without a single wrinkle. But behind closed doors, she was a master manipulator. She was like a faucet with only two settings, saccharine sweet or scalding hot. She'd spend an hour praising my grades in front of my teachers, only to spend the next 4 hours berating me because my smile looked insincere during the spelling bee. I learned very early on that the safest place to be was in the shadows. Then there was Derek. My brother is 5 years older than me and has spent his entire life being the golden boy. He was the varsity football star, the loudmouth charmer, the guy who could walk into a room and have everyone eating out of the palm of his hand within 5 minutes. He had my mother wrapped around his finger, and he played that card every single day. I was just the quiet kid who liked computers. I was the one who helped cook dinner while Derek was out partying, the one who didn't cause problems, the one who stayed invisible. I thought being low maintenance made me the good son, but I realized too late that in our house, if you don't make noise, you don't exist. After high school, I escaped. I got a full-ride scholarship to a state university, grinded through my courses to graduate early, and landed a high-paying remote IT job by the time I was 22. While my high school friends were blowing their paychecks on lifted trucks and bar tabs, I was living like a monk. I invested in stocks, researched real estate, and saved every penny. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I just wanted to build a fortress of financial security so I'd never have to walk on eggshells again. At 24, I did it. I bought a house. It wasn't a mansion, just a modest 3-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood about an hour away from my childhood home. It was supposed to be my get-out-of-jail-free card, a rental property that would fund my future. But then, the Teresa special happened. My mom called me, sobbing. She told me her rent had skyrocketed, her landlord was a monster, and she couldn't keep her head above water. Derek's job had slowed down, which was his code for, I got fired for being lazy again. And they were facing homelessness. She talked about moving in with our aunt, a woman she absolutely despised, making it sound like a death sentence. "It'll only be temporary, Evan," she whimpered over the phone. just until we get back on our feet. I should have said no. I should have remembered every time she threw my accomplishments in my face or called me a weirdo for preferring a stable career over real man's work, like construction or football. But she was my mother, and Derek was my brother. Somewhere deep down, in that pathetic, desperate part of my soul, I thought this might be the moment they'd finally see me. I thought that by saving them, I'd finally earn a seat at the table. So, I let them move in. No rent. All I asked was that they help with the utilities and buy their own groceries. The first month was manageable, if a bit suffocating. My home, my sanctuary, suddenly felt very small. I had to move my entire professional workstation, dual monitors, high-end PC, the works, out of my home office and into my cramped bedroom because my mom needed a space for her sewing. Mind you, she hadn't touched a sewing machine in a decade, but the room became her studio overnight. Derek took the third bedroom and basically treated the living room like his personal sports bar. He'd spend all day on the couch screaming at the TV or loudly FaceTiming his on-again, off-again girlfriend while I was trying to lead Zoom meetings for my job. I kept telling myself it was fine. It was temporary. But then the little things started to bleed me dry. I'd walk into the kitchen after a 10-hour shift to find a mountain of crusty dishes in the sink. I'd go to make a sandwich and realize the expensive deli meat I bought had been devoured by Derek. Then there were the packages. Random Amazon boxes started appearing on the porch daily. A fancy $200 espresso machine, industrial-sized tubs of protein powder, a high-end air fryer, all bought with money they supposedly didn't have. The atmosphere in my own house was shifting from guests to occupiers, and I was starting to realize that to them, I wasn't the owner. I was just the help that provided the roof. Would you like me to continue writing the next part of this story to show how the tension finally reached the breaking point? None of the luxury kitchen gadgets or high-end workout gear cluttering the porch belonged to me. I hadn't ordered a single one of them. When I finally confronted my mother about the mounting pile of Amazon boxes, she didn't even look up from her phone. She just waved me off with that practiced, airy dismissiveness that makes you feel like you're the crazy one. We're a family, Evan. Family shares everything. Don't be so petty. But sharing was a one-way street. I was the one covering the mortgage, the property taxes, and the insurance. Since the utilities were in my name, I eventually asked to see the receipts for the shared bills, just so I could keep my spreadsheets accurate. Her reaction was instantaneous and venomous. She pulled back, her face contorting into a mask of wounded pride. Are you keeping score now? Is that what this is? That's so ugly, Evan. Truly beneath you. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept my mouth shut. I retreated further into my work, logging 12-hour days just to avoid the tension downstairs. I bought expensive noise-canceling headphones to drown out Derek screaming at his PlayStation. I even tried to extend an olive branch by cooking massive family dinners once a week, hoping, dearly, desperately, to find some shred of the connection I saw other families have. It always ended the same. Derek would push the plate away and complain the steak was too tough, or Mom would sigh and launch into a monologue about how much better her recipes from 20 years ago were. The breaking point didn't happen all at once. It was a slow erosion. But one Tuesday, I walked through the front door after a grocery run and stopped dead. My room, my only sanctuary, was open. My $1,200 motorized standing desk, the one I had spent hours meticulously assembling, was gone. "Where's my desk?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of confusion and rising panic. Mom walked by with a laundry basket, looking as casual as if I'd asked about the weather. "Oh, we moved it to the garage. Derek needed the space for his home gym." "His what?" Derek's head popped out from around the hallway corner, a smirk plastered on his face. "It's just temporary, dude. I'm starting a new bulking cycle and I needed a solid place to lift. You can just work at the kitchen table, can't you? It's not that deep." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for him to tell me it was a prank. "You turned my professional workstation into a squat rack?" "Bro, relax," he rolled his eyes. "You're always so uptight. Take a chill pill." Something shifted inside me right then. It wasn't an explosion. It was a quiet, cold realization. The good son, who had been subsidizing their lives, was officially done. For the next 2 weeks, I stopped being the household provider. I didn't cook. I didn't restock the communal fridge. I moved my monitors to the coffee table and worked in the middle of the living room just to be an eyesore, a silent protest against their invasion. Predictably, this only fueled their narrative. I was being difficult. I was passive-aggressive. The final straw snapped on a brutal Tuesday night. I had just finished an absolute nightmare of a shift, a total server meltdown that had me sweating over code for 13 hours straight. I stumbled into the kitchen, starving, looking for the meal prep containers I'd spent my Sunday evening preparing. They were clearly marked Evan in thick black permanent marker. I found them in the sink, empty. Scraps of chicken and smeared sauce clung to the plastic, not even rinsed out. "Are you serious?" I muttered, the exhaustion finally turning into a sharp, jagged edge. Mom was sitting at the dining table, sipping tea. She didn't even glance up. "What now, Evan?" "You ate all my food. Again, it had my name on it. I prepped this so I could actually work this week." "Well, you didn't say we couldn't eat it," she said flatly, her voice dripping with boredom. "It had my name on it," I snapped. "I worked all day and I have nothing to eat in my own house." She slammed her teacup down and stood up, her eyes blazing with a sudden, terrifying heat. "Why are you being so incredibly selfish? Do you think because you make a little bit of money now, you're better than us? That you're the king of this castle?" "I didn't say that. You didn't have to. You walk around here like we're some kind of freeloaders, like we owe you something. You've always had this arrogant streak, acting like your precious computer makes you more important than your own blood." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from cracking. "You do live here rent-free, Mom. You haven't paid a dime toward the roof over your head." Her voice jumped an octave, turning into a screech. "Oh, so now you're holding that over our heads? Your own mother? You know what, Evan? If you hate it so much, if you're so miserable being around your family, then just leave." "I own this house, Mom," I said, the words feeling heavy and strange in the air. She stepped toward me, her face inches from mine. "Then maybe you should start acting like a real man instead of hiding behind a screen. You're a burden, Evan. You always have been. You think your father left because of me?" "No. He left because he couldn't handle you either. You were too much of a weight for him. Just like you are for us." The silence that followed was deafening. It hit me harder than a physical blow. I didn't even realize I'd dropped my house keys until I heard them clatter against the cold kitchen tile. I stood there for a long moment, looking at this woman who was supposed to love me, and realized I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just an overwhelming sense of being finished. I didn't scream, I didn't argue, I just turned around, walked into my bedroom, and grabbed a suitcase. I packed only the essentials: my clothes, my laptop, my chargers, and my toothbrush. I left the furniture I'd paid for. I left the bed I'd slept in. I left behind 26 years of trying to be enough. As I walked past the living room on my way to the door, neither of them looked up. Mom was back at the table. Derek was staring at the TV. I was just a background character whose scene had finally ended. No goodbye. No final fight. Just the sound of the front door clicking shut. For a month, that silence was the greatest gift I'd ever received. I crashed with a friend for a week, then found a sleek, quiet sublet. I focused on my work. I slept through the night without hearing Derek shouting. I ate food that actually belonged to me. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was walking back from a local coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in years, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Derek. "Why didn't you cover the mortgage this month? The bank sent a notice, fix it." I stopped on the sidewalk. I looked at the message, then at the bright blue sky above Minneapolis. I felt a slow, wicked smile spread across my face. I typed back one single sentence. "Oh, I thought you didn't need me." I hit send and shoved the phone back into my pocket. Within seconds, it started vibrating. Derek was calling. I didn't answer. He called again, and again, and again. My phone was a frantic, buzzing insect in my pocket, screaming for help that wasn't coming. I reached down, held the power button, and watched the screen go black. The silence was back. And this time, I was going to make sure it lasted. I can continue this to describe the absolute fallout when they realized the bank was actually going to foreclose. Or I can help you draft the update post where the legal drama really starts. What's our next move? That night, I lay on the stiff mattress of my tiny sublet studio, the air smelling faintly of stale laundry and cheap floor wax. I spent hours just staring at a jagged water stain on the ceiling, tracing its edges and wondering exactly how long it would take for the reality of their situation to pierce through their thick layers of entitlement. Spoiler alert, it didn't take long at all. By the time I woke up the next morning, my phone was a graveyard of missed calls and frantic notifications. I had nearly 20 voicemails. The first few were draped in that same arrogant, condescending armor they always wore when they wanted to remind me of my place. Derek's voice came through first, loud and aggressive, the sound of a man who's never been told no in his life. "You're acting like a literal child, Evan," he barked, his voice distorted by the speaker. "You can't just throw a tantrum, walk out, and stop paying for the house. Fix this, now." Then came Mom employing her signature passive-aggressive guilt-tripping, the kind that usually made my stomach do somersaults. "This is what happens when you prioritize money over family, Evan," she sighed, her voice dripping with artificial disappointment. "I didn't raise you to be this cold. Your brother is stressed. Have some heart." But as I scrolled down to message number 11, the bravado started to crumble. The armor was cracking. Derek's voice was an octave higher now. "Okay, man. Look, seriously. We just need to know what's going on. Did you cancel the mortgage autopay? Because the payment bounced and the bank is calling." Mom's final message was pure, unadulterated panic. "Evan, we got a certified letter. They said the account is in default. What does that even mean? Are they going to take the house? Call me back immediately." I sat there in the silence of my new life, sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee and folding my laundry with a rhythmic, steady hand. I listened to the entire stack of messages, the insults, the demands, the pleading, and I felt nothing. No regret, no spiking pulse. Just a strange, detached clarity. I was finally seeing them for what they were. Parasites who had mistaken their host for a permanent fixture. Here is the beautiful, jagged truth they refused to understand. The house was mine. Not technically mine. Not on paper mine. It was fully, legally, 100% my property. I had bought it with cash I'd spent years hoarding, so there was no actual mortgage to the bank. The mortgage they were so panicked about was actually a private monthly loan I had taken out after they moved in. Why? Because Mom had begged me to help Derek build his credit. I had added him as an authorized user and set up a loan structure to simulate a mortgage, creating a paper trail of payments they were supposed to cover to prove Derek's financial responsibility. Of course, Derek hadn't paid a single cent. I had been covering the loan myself every month, essentially paying a fake debt to keep the charade of their independence alive. They didn't even realize they weren't paying a real bank. They were just failing a test I had stopped subsidizing. And it gets even better. That $1,200 in rent they thought they were saving by living with me? I had been siphoning that exact amount into a separate savings account since the day they crossed the threshold. It was my in-case-of-emergency fund for this exact moment of total collapse. The betrayal didn't start the night I left, though. It had been bleeding out of them for years in 100 subtle ways. I just chose to be blind to it because I was starving for their approval. I wanted to believe that if I was the provider, if I was the successful one who fixed the Wi-Fi and kept the lights on, they'd finally see me as more than just the weird, quiet kid in the corner. But every win I had was just another target for them. When I got a massive promotion, Derek just smirked and asked, "Cool, but what's the actual salary? That IT stuff is just typing, right? It's not like you're out there doing real work." When I mentioned my property investments, Mom would roll her eyes and scoff. "Real estate? That's for old men with nothing better to do. You should get out more." When they moved into my house, they treated it like a conquered territory. Derek instantly claimed the primary suite, and Mom took the second largest bedroom for her unused sewing junk. I was shoved into the smallest room, the one intended for a home office, where I had to cram my life into 4 cramped walls. I remember Mom hosting dinners for her friends, parading Derek around as her pride and joy while I was literally in the kitchen, invisible, carving the roast I had bought and cooked myself. She even forgot my birthday for the 3rd year in a row, yet spent 2 months meticulously planning a blowout party for Derek, complete with a $400 custom cake that she charged to the joint household card I funded. The absolute breaking point, the moment the last thread of my patience snapped, happened about 2 weeks before I walked out. I was on a high-stakes midnight call with the team in Singapore, headset on, trying to navigate a massive server migration. Derek barged into the living room, completely ignoring the fact that I was clearly working. "Yo, Evan, quick thing," he said, leaning over my shoulder. "Can I put the new BMW in your name?" I actually had to pause my call. "What? Your car? Why?" "I want to refinance it, but my credit is still trash," he said, as if he were asking to borrow a stapler. "If we put it in your name, I'll get a killer rate. It's a win-win." "Derek, no, absolutely not." "Why not?" he snapped, his face reddening. "You've got the golden credit, don't you? Use it for something useful." "That's not the point. It's a massive legal responsibility. What happens when you miss a payment? It's my neck on the line." He scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Dude, don't be so dramatic. I'm good for it. You're always acting like I'm some deadbeat. You still owe me for the last 3 months of utilities, Derek." I reminded him, my voice tight. "Bro, relax. It's like $100. "It's actually closer to 400, I said. He just laughed, that hollow, entitled sound that had defined my entire childhood. "Bro, chill. It's just money." I stared at him in the dim light of my monitors. That was the moment. Exactly, I thought. It's just money. And if it was so insignificant, they wouldn't mind when I stopped providing it. Would you like to see what happened when I finally picked up the phone and told them the house was being sold out from under them? That was the first time I saw something in his eyes shift. It was subtle, but chilling. It wasn't just the usual flicker of annoyance. It was as if he finally realized I wasn't going to just roll over and play dead. For the first time in 26 years, he didn't see me as a resource to be tapped or a tool to be used. He saw me as an obstacle. He saw me as something that needed to be cleared out of the way. That night, I found my toothbrush floating in the toilet bowl. I wish I were kidding. I wish I were exaggerating for dramatic effect. But there it was, drifting in the water like some sick juvenile prank. I didn't yell. I didn't even ask who did it. I just stood there, staring at the porcelain, feeling a profound sense of course. I walked out of the bathroom, grabbed my keys, and left. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back. They genuinely thought I was bluffing. In their twisted reality, I was the spineless IT guy who would crawl back in a day or two once the guilt set in. But I didn't come back. Not when the calls started, and not even when they began leaving frantic messages claiming the bank was harassing them. That's when the situation turned truly ugly. See, Derek had been playing a dangerous game. He'd used my address, my house, for everything. His overpriced gym membership, his credit card applications, and even a couple of loans from those sketchy payday places that charge 400% interest. Now, the notices were piling up. Collectors were calling. Suddenly, I wasn't a burden anymore. I was essential. It's funny how fast the narrative changes the second the free ride hits a brick wall. The voicemails morphed into desperate emails, then texts, then pathetic DMs on every social media platform I had. And then, the letter arrived at my sublet. A plain white envelope with my name scrawled in aggressive red ink, looking like a prop from a cheap soap opera. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note from my mother. A real letter, the kind she hadn't bothered to write since I was a kid at summer camp. It started with the classic guilt trip. "I don't know why you're doing this to us, Evan. We're family. We've always been there for you." Then came the manipulation. "You know your brother isn't perfect, but he looks up to you. You're hurting him. You're hurting me." Finally, it dissolved into pure, unadulterated rage. "This is your home, Evan. You don't get to just walk away and take everything with you. You're being selfish, cruel, and heartless. This isn't the son I raised." I read it twice, my face as expressionless as a stone. Then I folded it neatly and slid it into the back of my desk drawer, right next to the expired lease of my first apartment and a generic happy birthday card from a coworker. It didn't hurt. Not in the way I expected. The sting was gone, replaced by a cold, hard curiosity about what they'd try next. The real betrayal, the one that actually made my heart stop, came 2 days later. I was checking my finances when a notification popped up from my bank. $1,300 had been withdrawn from my business savings account. I froze. That account was sacred. It was separate from everything else, not linked to the house, not linked to household expenses. My heart pounded against my ribs as I opened the app. The withdrawal had been made in person at a branch near my old neighborhood using a debit card. Only one other person had ever held that card. My mother. Years ago, when I was first starting out and she helped me open the account, I had listed her as a trusted contact. It was a formality, I thought. A just-in-case safety net. I'd never revoked it because, honestly, I'd forgotten she even had access. I raced to the bank, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I filed a fraud report, canceled the card, and changed every single password I could remember. But the damage was done. The money was gone. And I knew exactly where it went. $1,300 was the precise amount of the past due mortgage payment Derek owed. I don't know what stung more, the fact that she stole from her own son, or the fact that she did it with that same calm sense of entitlement she always had. Like it was hers. Like I owed her that too, on top of everything else. That night, I sat in my car outside my sublet. The engine was idling, the heater humming, and my fists were clenched so tight around the steering wheel that my knuckles were white. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just done. For years, I had let them chip away at my soul. Slowly, quietly, like water eroding a stone, I had given and given, hoping that one day they'd finally say, "Thank you," or "We're proud of you," or even just "You matter." But all I ever got was silence, or worse, gaslighting. Now they'd stolen from me. They'd lied, used me, and they still expected me to be their personal ATM. That was the night the good son died. I started planning my revenge right there in the driver's seat. It wasn't going to be some screaming match or a petty internet vendetta. No, this was going to be surgical. Slow, methodical. I would play the part of the quiet, compliant son one last time. I'd let them think I was still the background character. I'd let them think I was weak and easily broken. Because the moment I got that text from Derek, "Why didn't you cover the mortgage this month?" That was the moment the game changed. I stopped playing defense. I was moving my pieces across the board now, and they didn't even realize the board was on fire. There's a strange kind of quiet that settles in after your world collapses. It's not the silence of peace, it's the silence of the hunter waiting for the right moment to strike. And trust me, I was willing to wait. Would you like me to continue the story to show how I finally served them the eviction papers? Or how I dealt with the stolen money through the legal system? The silence wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of panicked, ringing in your ears quiet you get after an explosion. It was a low, constant hum, like white noise filling every corner of the empty spaces where my life used to be. That was the entire first week after the theft. I existed in a state of total emotional anesthesia. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad. I was just hollow. I moved through my days like I was navigating through deep water. Working, eating, nodding through Zoom meetings, where I stared at my own reflection in the corner of the screen and barely recognized the person looking back. I didn't tell a soul. Not my colleagues, not the couple of guys from college I still texted occasionally. I didn't even tell Jordan. We'd been seeing each other for a bit, but I'd always kept him at arm's length. When you come from a family like mine, you learn to treat your personal life like a classified document. You don't trust anyone with the mess because you're terrified they'll see the stain and realize you're damaged goods. That was my real rock bottom. It wasn't the betrayal or the stolen money. It was sitting in a sublet I didn't own, eating instant noodles out of a plastic bowl, staring at a bank app showing $1,300 less than it should, and finally realizing that I had spent my entire adult existence trying to buy love from people who only loved what I could provide. The second the ATM ran dry, I became disposable. I was just a broken appliance to them. That night, I didn't just silence my phone. I held the power button until the screen went black. I deleted the entire toxic text thread with my mother. All those years of "Are you coming home?" followed immediately by "Why didn't you do the dishes?" I archived Derek's messages. I didn't block them yet. I wanted to leave a trail of their insanity in case I needed it for court, but I needed to breathe. For the first time in 26 years, I chose to be selfish. The rebuilding didn't happen with a cinematic montage or a boss babe declaration of war. It started with small, almost pathetic acts of rebellion. The next morning, I went for a walk. No destination, no fitness tracker, just a 20-minute loop around the block. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd moved my body for any reason other than pacing my room during a stressful work call. Then I went to the store and bought a new toothbrush. It was a stupidly expensive one. Electric, obsidian black, Bluetooth-enabled, the kind of overkill gadget my brother would have mocked me for. It probably didn't clean any better than a $5 one, but every time it buzzed, it felt like a tiny middle finger to the one they dropped in the toilet. I went home and cooked a proper breakfast. Poached eggs, sourdough toast, sons, fresh avocado, and actual coffee. No labels, no meal prepping for ungrateful parasites, no checking the fridge to see what Derek had stolen. Just food. For me. It sounds small, I know. It sounds laughably trivial. But when your self-worth has been systematically ground into the dirt by years of emotional neglect and casual cruelty, these tiny acts of self-care feel like a goddamn revolution. The real shift happened when I finally stopped hiding. Jordan had been texting me, and I'd been blowing him off with the usual busy with work excuses. Then he sent me a picture of a scruffy little mutt in a tiny hoodie he saw at the park. For some reason, I just broke. I laughed. That full-on, ugly, breathless laugh that hurts your ribs. I texted back, "Want to grab coffee?" We met that evening. I was stiff and distant at first, my defensive walls 10 feet high and topped with concertina wire. But Jordan didn't push. He didn't demand the tea. He just sat there and let me talk when the words finally started leaking out. I didn't give him every gory detail, but I gave him the outline. The house, the burden comment, the stolen money. He didn't try to fix it with platitudes. He didn't tell me, "But they're your family." He just looked at me and said, "Evan, that's not your family's house anymore. That's your scar." I didn't get it at first. I just blinked at him. "Scars aren't places you go back to," he explained gently. "They're things that remind you of who you are now. You don't have to live in the pain to remember the lesson. You just carry the proof that you survived it." That hit me like a freight train. I'd been spent months, years really, trying to stitch the wound shut, trying to make the relationship look normal again, pretending the damage could be undone. But it couldn't. The house was a monument to my own mistreatment. I went home that night with a cold, surgical focus. I pulled up every document I possessed. The title deed, the property records, the utility accounts. I started making cuts. I removed my mother's name from every single shared utility. I canceled the joint credit card she used for emergencies, which usually meant overpriced candles and Derek's protein powder. I froze the business account and opened a new one under a fresh LLC they didn't even know existed. I changed every password to every account they had ever touched. Then I called the bank about the $1,300. I had the receipts, I had the timestamps. I had the absolute pleasure of watching the surveillance footage the bank manager pulled up. There was my mother, looking perfectly put together in her curled hair and ironed blouse, standing at the ATM and robbing her own son with the same calm entitlement she used to order a latte. The bank didn't even argue. They saw the footage, saw that I was the sole account holder, and refunded the money within a week. But that was just the beginning of the default. Would you like to hear about the day the eviction notice finally hit the front door? Or should we skip to the part where Derek tried to break into my new apartment? That moment when the notification flashed on my screen, The one confirming the $1,300 had been credited back to my account wasn't actually about the cash. It was about power. For the first time in my life, I felt the cool, solid weight of control in my hands. I wasn't just a passenger in my own life anymore. I was the pilot. From that point on, my ascent wasn't some perfectly linear upward line, but it was steady. My soul began to heal in the quietude of my sublet. I started sleeping through the night without the phantom sound of Derek's heavy footsteps or my mother's sharp, critical voice. I was eating real meals and my performance at work surged. I finally pitched a project I'd been sitting on for months, a complete redesign of our client security dashboard, and my manager gave me the green light on the spot. Within 3 weeks, I was leading a hand-picked team. Within 2 months, I was called into a private office. "We're bumping your title, Evan," my boss said, offering a firm handshake. "Senior engineer, you've more than earned it." I didn't cry in front of him, though the pressure behind my eyes was immense. For the first time, recognition hadn't come through the lens of obligation, manipulation, or some manufactured sense of family guilt. It was just merit. It was pure effort. And then I did something that felt absolutely insane. I bought a second property. It wasn't a mansion, just a fixer-upper duplex on the ragged edge of town. It needed everything. New floors, a fresh coat of paint, a complete plumbing overhaul. But it had good bones, and more importantly, it was mine alone. I didn't tell a soul, not even Jordan at first. I just quietly finalized the paperwork, hired contractors, and spent my weekends covered in dust and white paint. I spent hours tearing up old, cigarette-scented carpet while listening to audiobooks, the rhythmic work acting as a form of therapy I never knew I needed. With every nail I hammered and every tile I laid, I felt like I was rebuilding the shattered infrastructure of my own self-esteem. One Saturday afternoon, while I was patching a jagged hole in the drywall of the upstairs hallway, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it go. An hour later, it buzzed again. Same number. I finally wiped my dusty hands on my jeans and answered, expecting a telemarketer. "Hey," a voice said. It was Derek. His tone was tight, stripped of its usual bravado. "We need to talk." I didn't say a word. I just leaned against the unfinished wall and listened to the sound of my own breathing. "Look, I know you're pissed," he continued, sounding like he was reciting a script he hated. "But Mom's not doing great. She's stressed out, like really stressed. The bank called again today." I waited, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. He finally sighed, the sound of a man who realized his charms were failing him. "Look, man, we've been trying to keep up with the bills, but it's a lot. It's too much." "You mean my bills?" I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. He hesitated, his voice dropping an octave. "Okay, yeah, but it's your house, right? We just thought you were still, handling that side of things." "You also thought I was a burden," I replied. The silence that followed was heavy, like a thick fog rolling in between us. I could almost hear his brain scrambling for a comeback, a joke, a way to make me the uptight one again. Finally, he muttered, "Yeah, well, that was messed up. I get it." I didn't offer him an out. I didn't say it was okay. I just let the silence sit there, rotting. "So, what now?" he asked, sounding small. I smiled. Not a happy smile, but the sharp, dangerous smile of someone who finally sees the finish line. "Now," I said, "now you learn what it feels like to be responsible for your own life." "Evan, come on." Click. I ended the call because I wasn't done rising yet. I had a plan, a surgical, multi-layered plan, and they weren't going to like a single second of it. The call with Derek only confirmed what I'd already suspected. They still didn't get it. They still viewed this as a temporary glitch, a phase I was going through before I'd inevitably come to my senses and resume my role as the human safety net. They didn't understand that I wasn't just angry. I was focused. People like my mother and Derek depend on patterns. They weaponize your predictability. They rely on the fact that you won't change, so they can keep pushing and pushing until there's nothing left of you. But when you stop reacting the way they expect, the very ground beneath their feet begins to fracture. I was done being the silent son. It was time for that version of me to be buried. But first, I had to tie up the loose ends of my old life. The house was legally mine, always had been. But with them squatting in it and refusing to pay a dime, I had to be strategic. I didn't want a messy, screaming confrontation on the front lawn for the neighbors to feast on. I wanted total, absolute control. I started researching landlord-tenant laws with a quiet, burning obsession. I devoured legal forums, read through Minnesota's eviction statutes until I could cite them by heart, and watched landlord advice videos at 2 a.m. while sipping tea like I was binge-watching a thriller. I even joined property management groups under a fake name to ask the questions I didn't want traced back to me. I learned the hard truth. Evicting family is a nightmare. It's messier, longer, and psychologically draining. Since there was no formal lease, they were technically tenants at will, meaning I could initiate the process with a formal notice to vacate. But I also knew my family. If I just served them papers, they wouldn't leave quietly. They'd dig in their heels, play the victim to the entire town, and likely destroy the house out of pure, petty spite before a sheriff could ever remove them. I needed to be smarter. I needed to lead them into a trap of their own making. I wasn't just going to take my house back. I was going to make sure they had no choice but to walk away. Would you like me to detail the cash for keys offer I prepared? Or should we skip to the day I showed up with a moving truck and a police escort to reclaim what was mine? I knew exactly what my brother was capable of when his ego was bruised, and I had zero doubt that my mother would transform the situation into a Shakespearean tragedy, starring herself as the abandoned martyr. If I wanted them out, I couldn't just ask. I needed leverage. I needed something so cold and bureaucratic that their usual emotional manipulation would simply slide off it like water off a duck's back. I needed to make leaving feel like their only escape route. So I played my first card, the house inspection. I contacted the local housing department and requested a voluntary health and safety walkthrough of the property. The house wasn't a total ruin, but I knew their habits. I knew Derek had installed a janky DIY gym setup in the garage with zero ventilation, and I knew Mom's obsession with atmosphere meant dozens of cheap plug-in air fresheners were currently overloading the ancient outlets. And the kitchen? I knew for a fact it was a biohazard of rotting takeout and crusty dishes. When the inspector arrived, I played the part of the concerned, slightly naive homeowner to perfection. I didn't point fingers. I just trailed behind him with my hands in my pockets, letting the stench of neglected trash do the talking. The inspector clicked his tongue, his pen flying across his clipboard. "Electrical overload here. This is a legitimate fire hazard," he muttered, pointing at a daisy chain of power strips. He poked his head into the bathroom and recoiled. "Black mold behind the shower tiles. This is bad." Then he opened the utility closet and sighed. "This HVAC system hasn't been serviced in 3 years, kid. You're asking for a carbon monoxide leak." "Oh, really?" I said, my voice dripping with faux surprise. "I'm so sorry. I asked the people staying here to handle the maintenance while I was away for work. I guess it just slipped their minds." He raised an eyebrow, looking at me over his glasses. "The people staying here?" "My mom and brother," I said with a tight, sad smile. "I let them stay rent-free because they were struggling. You know how family is." He nodded slowly, his expression shifting from professional annoyance to genuine pity. The report he filed 48 hours later was a masterpiece of red tape. It contained pages of violations. Nothing that would get the house condemned, but more than enough to legally justify an immediate vacancy for urgent structural and safety remediation. It was the golden ticket. It gave me the rock-solid legal standing to serve a formal notice to vacate with a strict 30-day deadline. I printed the notice on thick, crisp white paper, folded it with military precision, and hand-delivered it on a Tuesday afternoon when I knew the house would be empty. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't want a scene. I just slid it through the mail slot and walked away, feeling lighter with every step I took toward my car. Predictably, the digital warfare began the next morning. Derek's text was first. "You're actually kicking us out? On the street? What the hell is wrong with you, man? You've lost your mind." Then came the guilt bomb from Mom. After everything I sacrificed to raise you, this is how you repay me? You're throwing your own flesh and blood into the cold? I hope you're happy with yourself." I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The legal document in their hallway was doing all the talking for me. And for the first time, they realized I wasn't playing a character. I was the one holding the script. But I wasn't satisfied with just having them gone. I wanted a permanent record of what they'd done to my sanctuary. I hired a professional real estate photographer to go in while they were out and take high-resolution, wide-angle shots of the filth. I wanted the kitchen rot, the overflowing garbage, and the deep, dark stains in the carpet documented in 4K. I wasn't going to post them on Facebook. Not yet, anyway. But I wanted evidence for when they inevitably tried to rewrite history and tell everyone I'd kicked them out of a pristine home. Then, I made the call to the locksmith. I scheduled the rekeying for exactly 8 a.m. on the 31st day, not a minute sooner. I was following every local ordinance to the letter. I wasn't going to give them a single inch to claim an unlawful eviction. During those 30 days, I became a ghost. I drove by the house once a week, just a quick loop around the block at night. I never stopped, never lingered, but I saw the red flags of their spiraling chaos. Lights were burning at 3 a.m. I could hear bass-heavy music thumping from the garage. There was a new vehicle in the driveway. A beat-up, rusted-out Dodge Charger I didn't recognize. Probably Derek's latest investment with my stolen money. Once, I saw Derek stumble out the front door, shirtless and clutching a beer, screaming into his phone at some poor soul. I pulled over a block away, snapped a photo, and added it to the evidence folder on my cloud drive. Meanwhile, my actual life was exploding in the best way possible. I was promoted again, this time to lead developer. Bigger paycheck, massive bonuses, and a team that actually respected my input. My boss pulled me aside after a successful sprint and told me, "I don't know what changed with you, Evan, but you've been absolutely killing it lately." I just smiled. "Yeah," I said. "I stopped investing in bad code. I'm focusing on high-return assets now." I even brought Jordan to see the duplex I was renovating. He walked through the gutted rooms, looking at the fresh drywall and the plans I'd drawn up for the rental units. He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at me with a mix of awe and something deeper. "Are you building an empire, Evan?" he asked, half joking. "Nah," I said, grinning as I picked up a hammer. "I'm just building a life where I never have to ask for permission to exist again. Would you like me to tell you about the morning the 30 days ran out, and they found me standing on the porch with the locksmith and the local sheriff? Or should we move to the final confrontation where Mom tried one last desperate play for my sympathy?" "I'm not building an empire," I told Jordan, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across my face as I surveyed the skeletal remains of the duplex. "I'm just reclaiming the kingdom." But even with my career skyrocketing and my new life falling into place, a dark, cynical part of me was still braced for impact. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop because I knew my mother. Women like Teresa don't just fade into the sunset. They don't go quietly into the night. They want a standing ovation for their suffering, even if that suffering is entirely self-inflicted. When day 30 finally rolled around, the deadline I had set in stone, I wasn't surprised to find a voicemail waiting for me. Her voice was uncharacteristically small, stripped of its usual razor-sharp edge. "Evan, please, just call me. I need you to call me." I didn't even consider it. Instead, I spent that evening finalizing a police standby for the following morning. I wasn't taking any chances with Derek's temper or my mother's dramatics. On day 31, I drove to my house. I wasn't the shaking kid who had walked out a month prior. I was a man with a mission, flanked by a locksmith, a uniformed officer, and a professional-grade folder containing the eviction notice, the health and safety report, and high-res photo documentation of their neglect. When we pulled up, the driveway was hauntingly empty. No rusted Dodge Charger, no piles of Amazon boxes. The blinds were drawn tight, looking like closed eyelids. I knocked once, firm, echoing. No answer. The officer stepped up, his heavy fist thudding against the wood. He waited, then knocked again, his hand resting near his belt. "Your call, kid," he said, glancing back at me. I nodded to the locksmith. The sound of the lock being picked felt like a symphony. Within minutes, the door swung open, and I stepped into what was once my sanctuary. The house was eerie. It felt like a tomb. Empty pizza boxes were strewn across the mahogany table I'd worked so hard to buy. Trash bags leaked mystery fluids in the hallway, and the air was thick with the suffocating stench of stale beer, cheap cigarettes, and unwashed bodies. I saw a broken lamp in the living room and noticed one of my designer dining chairs was missing a leg, probably smashed in some fit of Derek's rage. But they were gone. No goodbye note, no long-winded apology. Just a vacuum where people used to be. It was a victory, but a cold one. They hadn't left because they realized they were wrong. They left because I had finally built a cage they couldn't talk their way out of. I stood in that ruined living room for a long time after the officer left, just breathing in the stillness. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even a gotcha moment. It was closure. The weight was gone. But I wasn't done. The house was empty, but the debt remained unpaid. And in my world, every action has a reaction. Forgiveness wasn't in my toolkit. I'd used up my last bit of that years ago. But consequences? I had those in spades. Revenge isn't always a cinematic explosion. It doesn't have to be fire, fury, and screaming matches. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is a slow, methodical burn. It's the kind that unfolds so calmly that by the time you realize you're being dismantled, the last bolt has already been removed. That was the game I was playing now. The first thing I did was turn the house into a crime scene. Financially speaking. I brought in a professional property inspector and a certified appraiser. I didn't rush the process. I wanted every cracked baseboard, every deep carpet stain, and every missing fixture recorded in an official notarized report. Then I hired contractors to fix the damage, keeping every single invoice and receipt like they were holy relics. I wasn't just repairing a building. I was building a legal guillotine. Next, I called Philip, the no-nonsense attorney who had handled my duplex closing. I want to sue for property damage, unpaid utilities, and unauthorized use of funds, I told him. And Philip, I have the receipts for everything. There was a long pause on the line. You're serious? You want to take your mother and brother to court? Dead serious, I replied. I sent him the Teresa and Derek final draft folder, a digital mountain of bank statements, text logs, the eviction trail, and the surveillance footage of the ATM theft. 2 days later, Philip called back with a grim sort of satisfaction in his voice. We have a case. Let's roll. We filed a small claim suit. I wasn't looking for $1 million payout. I was looking for the principal. I wanted a judge to look them in the eye and tell them exactly what they owed me. But the real masterstroke was the credit reporting. Derek, in his infinite, arrogant wisdom, had used my address to open a web of credit lines. Using the official eviction records, the police standby report, and the signed affidavit from the housing inspector, I disputed every single account tied to my property or my name. The credit bureaus moved with surprising speed. The accounts weren't just deleted. They were reassigned and redirected to Derek's actual identity. The fallout was glorious. Derek's life turned into a financial graveyard overnight. The golden boy finally hit the wall. He tried calling me, his voice cracking with desperation. When I didn't answer, he started texting threats. Finally, he showed up at my new duplex, pounding on the door and screaming at the top of his lungs that I was ruining his life and destroying the family. I didn't open the door. I didn't even look through the peephole. I sat on my new sofa, pulled out my phone, and calmly called the police to report a trespasser and file for a restraining order. He vanished before the sirens arrived, but the paper trail was growing longer by the day. The background character had officially taken over the lead role, and the stars of the show were realizing they were just extras in a story they no longer controlled. Would you like me to describe the day we finally sat across from each other in a courtroom? Or should I tell you about the final message I sent my mother before blocking her for good? A week later, my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. You really think this makes you better than us? Hurting your own family just to feel powerful? I didn't even give them the satisfaction of a read receipt. I just blocked the number and went back to my coffee. I wasn't playing their game anymore. Then came the court date. The air in the hallway of the courthouse felt heavy, sterilized, and cold. They showed up late, of course. A final petty power move. Derek was wearing a wrinkled polo that looked like it had been pulled from a hamper, and Mom was in a floral blouse I recognized from one of the many birthdays she'd celebrated for Derek while ignoring mine. They didn't even look at me when I walked into the room. They just sat there, staring straight ahead with practiced expressions of righteous indignation, looking like the lead actors in some low-budget, made-for-TV movie about betrayal. Philip and I sat at our table, calm and prepared. My folder was organized. My evidence was undeniable. Philip was surgical. He didn't use flowery language or emotional pleas. He just laid out the facts like he was performing an autopsy on our relationship. He presented the documentation of the damages, the bank statements proving the theft, the full timeline of the unauthorized use of my funds. It was cold, sharp, and devastating. Then it was their turn to speak, and they fumbled. Hard. It was honestly embarrassing to watch. They tried to claim I'd given them verbal permission to use my debit card, that I'd gifted them the utilities as a thank you for their presence, and that I'd never once told them there was a problem. At one point, Derek actually looked the judge in the eye and said, he never said we couldn't drink his beer. The judge didn't even blink. He just raised a single skeptical eyebrow. Mr. Foster, the issue before this court isn't a few missing beers. It is a documented $1,300 withdrawal from your brother's business account without his consent. Derek looked at Mom. She looked down at her lap, suddenly very interested in a loose thread on her sleeve. They had nothing. No receipts, no proof, no leg to stand on. We won. The court ordered them to pay full restitution for the property damages and the unauthorized withdrawal, plus all my filing fees. It wasn't a life-ruining amount of money, but it was enough to sting. It was enough to remind them every time they looked at their bank balance that I was no longer their ATM. They didn't even look at me when the gavel fell. They just scurried out of the courtroom like rats fleeing a sinking ship. But the fallout was only just beginning. While they were still reeling from the legal judgment, I made my next move. I took those high-res photos of the trashed kitchen, the broken door frame, and the disgusting mess they left behind, and I posted them on a major property management forum. I kept it anonymous. No names, no addresses, just raw images of the carnage. I even included a shot of a sticky note I found on the fridge that said, "Evan's a snake. Don't trust him." The post absolutely blew up. Thousands of upvotes. People in the comments were horrified. I answered their questions vaguely. Tenants at will. Family members who took advantage of a rent-free situation. It became a viral cautionary tale shared in real estate groups and landlord subreddits. One guy messaged me privately saying, "Dude, this sounds exactly like my cousin. I was about to let him move in. You just saved my life." I just replied with 6 words, "Be careful who you let stay." I wasn't done, though. When the restitution check finally cleared, I didn't just pocket the money. I used every cent of it to give the house a total rebirth. I didn't just do touch-ups, I did a full top-to-bottom refresh. New slate gray siding, crisp white shutters, a bold navy blue door, and most importantly, a brand new nameplate on the mailbox. I stripped the house of every memory they'd left behind. Then, I listed it for rent. I set premium pricing and required rigorous background checks. No exceptions. No family favors. The new tenants were a couple in their late 50s, empty nesters who were polite, quiet, and respectful. The kind of people who fix a leaky faucet before you even notice it's dripping. They moved in with genuine smiles and even brought over a casserole. Just like that, the house was no longer a scar. It was a performing asset. It was a source of peace. Meanwhile, the consequences for Derek and Mom continued to ripple out. Derek's credit score had been nuked. I know because a mutual acquaintance from high school messaged me out of the blue. "Hey, I heard Derek tried to buy a car and got laughed out of the dealership. Something about massive collections and a judgment?" I just typed back, "Yeah, I think he had some unresolved financial issues to settle." And Mom? The last I heard, she was living in a cramped spare room with a cousin in Iowa. The same cousin she used to mock as a washed-up drunk with 6 cats. Apparently, now that cousin is a godsend and a saint. It's funny how fast your perspective shifts when a gravy train stops running and you realize nobody else is coming to save you. As for me, I kept building. That duplex I renovated turned into a triplex. Then I picked up a small commercial space downtown, a charming little cafe spot that needed a fresh start. I didn't open a business myself. I just rented it to a local baker who actually works hard for her dreams. I kept dating Jordan too. We didn't rush into anything, but our relationship felt easy, like a long overdue exhale. He never demanded the full story, never pushed for the tea. He just held my hand through the rough days and reminded me, Evan, you deserve to be free. And eventually, I was. I was free from the crushing weight of guilt, free from the bottomless need for their approval, and free from the toxic belief that family has to hurt you to be real. They say blood is thicker than water, but I've learned the hard way that respect is thicker than both. The day I walked past that newly painted house, watching my tenants wave from the porch while I held their rent check in my hand, I realized something vital. I hadn't just taken my life back. I had rebuilt it from the ashes they left behind, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it to prove something, not to them, but to the kid who used to hide in his room to avoid the screaming. I was never the burden. I was the foundation. And now the house I built is finally standing on solid ground. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for my channel. Your support means everything. See you in the next one.